Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. We have lots of participants on the call. We're excited to have you all here for this fascinating discussion. My name is Emily Pomeroy and I'm the program manager at Save Our Shores. And we have an excellent evening planned out for you tonight as part of Save Our Shores Earth Day 50 speaker series, highlighting the importance of this pivotal year, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, by discussing growing problems and groundbreaking solutions for our oceans and climate. Also joining us from our team this evening is Gail McNulty, Senior Manager for Communications and Climate Action, who will be monitoring the chat and supporting tonight's discussion. Finally, we also have Executive Director Catherine O'Day with us tonight. Catherine, would you like to say a few words to get us started?
Sure. Hello, everyone, all of you out there in Zoom land as well as Facebook land. It's so great to have you with us tonight. You know, we usually do these events in years past live, and have been fortunate to have wonderful people come out and gather and enjoy these events. But it's also rewarding to see so many people join on Zoom in this virtual format. We hope that you really enjoy this evening. I know Emily has done a fabulous job pulling this together. We have some excellent speakers with us tonight. It's a topic that is near and dear to everyone's heart who loves the ocean, who loves marine life. So I think it'll be a great evening. I'm glad you're here. Welcome everyone, and please just sit back and enjoy. See you on the other side.
Great, thank you so much, Catherine. Okay, so just to start out, a few virtual presentation logistics since we are meeting on Zoom this evening. Please, if you're able to, remain on mute with your video turned off so that we can hear and see the speakers and preserve bandwidth so that we don't have any glitches this evening. Feel free to enter comments or questions into the chat and we'll try to get everyone's questions at the end of the event. And just so everyone is aware, we are recording this event as well as live streaming on Facebook to reach a wider audience. So if anyone out there has not used Zoom or isn't incredibly familiar with Zoom, you should see this bar at the bottom of your screen. The mute and unmute button is this little microphone icon here. You can turn your video off by clicking this little camera icon, and then the chat button should be in the center of your toolbar. You're also welcome to react at any point if you want using the reactions icon, that little smiley face there. Okay. A brief overview of what we will talk about this evening. Tonight's event will last approximately until 8 p.m. We'll begin by introducing tonight's speakers. Then we'll jump into a discussion amongst our panel members for the bulk of our time this evening. And we'll save questions from the audience until the end. Everyone is welcome to type their questions into the chat at any time, and Gail will direct your questions to our speakers at the end of the event. With that, I would now like to introduce our wonderful and accomplished speakers coming from 3 esteemed agencies to discuss this important topic with us tonight. Thank you all so much for being here. The first of our speakers that I would like to introduce is Peggy West-Stap, the Executive Director and the founder of Marine Life Studies, as well as the co-founder of Whale Entanglement's team, or WET. Peggy is a Michigan native, saw her first whales on a whale watch in Maui, Hawaii, which was a life-changing experience. In 2006, she founded Marine Life Studies, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to research, education, and whale rescue in Moss Landing, California, where she volunteers her time as executive director. Peggy is also co-founder of the Whale Entanglement Team, WET, co-investigator level 3 responder under NOAA MMHSRP permit for whale rescue, and the principal investigator under NOAA NMFS permit to conduct research on whales and dolphins in the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. In 2019, she started a pilot project unseen and beneath the surface, derelict fishing gear pot retrieval. This proactive project removes lost and discarded fishing gear on the sea floor, which no longer has a line and buoy at the surface, thereby reducing potential entanglements of whales, dolphins, sea turtles, sharks, and other marine wildlife. Peggy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Okay, our next speaker is Morgan Ivens-Duran. Morgan is an environmental scientist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife Whale-Safe Fisheries team, and previously held positions focusing on groundfish and highly migratory species management. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Marine Biology from Brown University and a Master's of Science in Biological Sciences from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Prior to joining CDFW, she was a California Sea Grant Fellow with the Ocean Protection Council in Sacramento. As part of the Whale-Safe Fisheries team, Morgan works to uphold the dual goals of reducing marine wildlife entanglements and supporting thriving commercial and recreational fisheries. Whale-Safe Fisheries staff work with a broad cross-section of stakeholders and staff from other state and federal agencies to advance initiatives related to lost or abandoned fishing gear removal, development and testing of innovative gear types, and outreach regarding best fishing practices. The Whale-Safe Fisheries team also leads in-season assessment of marine life entanglement risk in the Dungeness crab fishery and advances appropriate management measures. And you can find more information about the Whale-Safe Fisheries team by following the link that Gail is going to pop into the chat. Okay, thank you so much, Morgan, for being here tonight. Last, but of course not least, we have our final speaker, Karen Grimmer. Karen has been with the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary since 1999 and is responsible for the resource protection activities with the agencies through leading a small team of 6. During her tenure, she served as Deputy Superintendent for 5 years and has worked at the sanctuary in a variety of positions, including Education Program Coordinator for a multicultural outreach program. For the past 8 years, she has overseen the site's marine policy and environmental review activities, including coastal development issues, fisheries-related issues such as whale entanglement, vessel traffic compliance, and lost fishing gear removal. Karen also serves on a variety of state and local committees for MPA management. Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you to all of our speakers for joining us this evening. We're very excited to hear from you. And I just wanted to, for anyone who just popped in, we included a few more folks into the Zoom meeting here. So if everyone could please remain on mute and turn your videos off so that we can see and hear our speakers, that would be greatly appreciated. Okay. So Karen is going to be starting us off today, providing us with a little bit of background on the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. Karen, take it away.
All right, thank you, Emily. Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here today speaking with you about whale entanglements in the sanctuary. We had originally hoped to do this in person, yet I'm glad we decided to go ahead virtually. And I'm really pleased to be sharing the screen with Morgan and Peggy, as I've worked with both of them for a number of years now and have great respect for their dedicated efforts in their respective areas of expertise. So we're going to tag team the presentation tonight and cover a lot of ground on a number of topics. As you can imagine, this issue is quite complex and multi-layered. I'm going to start us off by providing a very brief introduction to the sanctuary as background, and then hand off to Peggy for more about the basic ecology of marine mammals in the bay. And then Morgan will take us into the anatomy of an entanglement. So let's start off by diving into Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. And first of all, the name is a little bit deceiving because a lot of people think it's just Monterey Bay itself that's protected, but our sanctuary boundaries start north of San Francisco in Marin County and go all the way down to the town of Cambria, which is in San Luis Obispo County. There is 276 miles of shoreline, which extend an average of 30 miles offshore and covers 6,094 square miles of federally protected ocean. It's one of the largest marine sanctuaries in the nation, and it's actually larger than Yellowstone National Park. The deepest known spot is 12,713 feet at the Davidson Seamount, which is that little square block offshore there. This is an amazing and active volcano that's 26 miles long and 8 miles wide, with old ancient coral species that thrive in these cold, deep, productive waters. This sanctuary system is part of a system of 13 national marine sanctuaries and 2 marine national monuments across the country. These are special areas in the ocean that have national significance that we protect under the National Marine Sanctuaries Act, which was enacted by Congress in 1972. So under the Act, MDNMS was established for the purposes of resource protection, research, education, and public use. Human uses also, they include commercial fishing, recreational activities like diving, kayaking, boating, and surfing, all of the things we love to do. However, some activities that could harm the sanctuary's health, such as oil drilling, ocean dumping, or seabed mining, are not allowed, and we have regulations to prohibit those activities. So through a comprehensive resource protection effort, research, and education, we really strive to strike a balance between protection of the resources and human uses, and we work closely with many other natural resource agencies to accomplish that mission, as well as with the public through a variety of different councils and groups. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So one of the most unique features of Monterey Bay is this deep sea canyon that's about halfway between Santa Cruz and Monterey. It's larger than the Grand Canyon in depth, and if you didn't see it on an underwater map, you would never even know it was there. But this undersea canyon lies just a few miles offshore from Moss Landing, and it provides great research opportunities because it means we have very deep water very close to shore. So research institutions, and there are many in this area, like the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, can go out for a day and explore the deep sea environments and study animals completely new to science, and then be home for dinner. So that's not really the case in many other parts of the world. So this is a very unique research opportunity in a very unique habitat that we have right here in our backyard. And our research team works very closely with MBARI and the other institutions to further research in the sanctuary. So for the next slide, we're going to talk about the productive ecosystem. And as many of you probably know, the California current, which flows south, together with the upwelling from the Deepwater Canyon, are key factors for such a productive ecosystem in Monterey Bay. So the deep water holds a lot of nutrients, and in the springtime, when we get really strong winds, it mixes up our coastal waters and brings a lot of this really cold, nutrient-rich water up to the surface, which kicks off the whole food web from tiny little plankton up to krill. Anchovies are then eating the krill, salmon are eating the anchovies, seals are eating the salmon, and all the way up to apex predators such as white sharks and killer whales, which feed on marine mammals. So the deep water close to shore, again, is a very important part of what makes this area so significant. And as you can imagine, all of that food draws lots of migratory animals here. And so on a summer day, there's a really good chance you can see well over 10 species of whales or dolphins. And so Monterey Bay is an established hotspot for migrating and charismatic megafauna, such as large blue whales and humpback whales, which come here to feed on the smorgasbord of krill and small fishes. Humpbacks from Central and South America in particular migrate here to feed. And Peggy will talk more about this, but they start showing up around April or May and stay into October, November, with some subadults actually staying in the bay all year round. It's hard to leave for such a long trip when there's so much food here. Also, I wanted to mention that the central coast of California is a transition or a meeting zone between northern and southern species, which basically means we have northern and southern species that have reached their range limits and are cohabiting here. So again, due to the productivity driven by coastal currents and upwelling from the canyon, we have a very productive ecosystem here. So not only do we have deep sea habitats, but Monterey Bay Sanctuary has a number of other habitats, including long, beautiful sandy beaches, rugged, rocky intertidal areas, kelp forests, and estuarine and mudflat environments like the Elkhorn Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve, which is just adjacent to the sanctuary and in Moss Landing. So just a diversity of different habitats that support a lot of different species here can be found all in one place. And you can see the numbers here: marine algae, 450 species, invertebrates, 31 phyla, 525 species of fish, 4 species of sea turtles, 36 species of marine mammals, and well over 180 species of seabirds can be found here. So this kind of species and habitat richness is just another thing that makes our area so significant. And it's something that we highlight through exhibits in our visitor centers in both Santa Cruz and San Simeon. And one last habitat to mention is the continental shelf, because along the shelf break, that's where we find one of the most sought after seafood delicacies, Dungeness crab. This is where the shallow, flat area breaks off into the deeper canyon, and the nutrient-rich water is available for the crabs to grow, which in turn supports a thriving fishery. So that's partly why we're here today talking about the issue of whale entanglement, as we have a place where whales and fixed gear fishing are sometimes co-occurring, and fishing lines have the potential to entrap whales. So our collective work together is how we find ways to reduce the risk of entanglement. And I'll pass it on to Peggy.
Peggy, your mic is not on.
No, I have a feeling I'm going to do that a few times tonight. Anyway, we are fortunate that the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary has such an incredible ecosystem. We're very fortunate in that way. What you're seeing on the screen now is our waterproof marine mammal guide that includes illustrations of all the marine mammal species that you can see off the coast of California, how to observe them in the wild, and information on how to report an entangled whale. And the illustrations are beautiful. They're done by Peter Falcons, who is a level 4 responder in the Whale Disentanglement Network. Next slide. There are many whales here that feed in the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, just like this humpback whale here that you see. We have the largest and smallest baleen whales that frequent the bay. Whales are commonly seen in, some of the ones that are commonly seen in the Monterey Bay are the baleen whales, such as the humpback whale, the blue whale, which is the largest whale of any on Earth, and fin whales. You see gray whales migrating through their, during their migration from Alaska down to the warm Mexican waters and back. So we'll see those usually during the winter months and then through spring. Plus we have minke whales, which are the smallest baleen whale that actually live here year round. We are so fortunate to observe whales and dolphins year round in Monterey Bay.
Excellent. The sanctuary is shared between wildlife and humans, and sometimes conflicts can occur. Whales can become entangled for a variety of reasons. Next, we'll discuss how and why entanglements occur, and then we'll find out what the response process is like when a whale is discovered to be entangled. Morgan, can you start us off on this next topic?
Absolutely. Thanks, Emily. So whale entanglements come in many forms. Mostly we think about entanglements in fishing gear such as gill nets or traps, but entanglements can also occur in things like mooring buoys or marine debris. However, a lot of our work at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife is focused on entanglements in trap gear, and that's mostly what I'll be speaking to tonight. So even if we're looking just at entanglements in trap gear, there's a lot that we don't know about the specific ways that large whales become entangled. And this is an area where detailed documentation by the person reporting the entanglement and the entanglement response team is critical, because photos and videos that are taken of the gear on the whale, and if the whale is disentangled, actually collecting that gear helps experts reconstruct how that entanglement happened. And as Emily mentioned, Peggy's going to be speaking more to the entanglement response effort a little later on. In general, off California, trap gear is set up where you have a weighted trap at the bottom, one or more buoys at the surface, and a vertical line in between them. And as you can see here, when a whale swims by, it can get wrapped up either in the vertical line, as shown on the next slide, or in the gear that's at the surface, those lines and buoys. Based on some of the documentation that's been collected from prior entanglements, we know that the specific way trap gear is set up can increase the risk of an entanglement happening. For example, the traps that I showed here have a taut line between the trap and the surface buoys, but having a lot of slack in the line can increase the chance that when a whale swims by, it's going to get entangled. Additionally, the way that different pieces of the gear are connected can increase the risk of an entanglement. If there are lots of knots in the line, that can create attachment points for the gear to get stuck, and it can be harder for the whale to disentangle itself without human intervention. There's a lot of interest from the department, fishermen, conservation groups, and innovators around the question of, can we change the way gear is set up to make these entanglements less likely? And Karen is going to be talking more about some of those efforts later on tonight. So now for the question, how many whales get entangled? So NOAA Fisheries started keeping records on this in 1982. And between then and 2014, there was an average of 7 entanglements per year across the entire West Coast and for all large whale species. This figure here is from the most recent annual West Coast Entanglement Summary, and it spans the years 2000 to 2019. As you can see, there were fairly low values until 2014, and then we started to see these really high numbers in 2015 and 2016. And in particular, we started to see increased numbers of humpback whale entanglements, which is of particular concern because the humpbacks that feed off of California during the summer are protected under the Federal Endangered Species Act. One thing I want to emphasize about this chart is that this is for all entanglements across the entire West Coast, not just those in California. But if we look at where those entanglement reports are coming from, about 85% of them do originate in California. However, and this is my second caveat about this chart, the reporting location doesn't necessarily reflect where that whale was entangled. Here in California, and especially in places like Monterey, we have a lot of people living near the coast and a lot of people who are out on the water, which increases the chance that a given entangled whale will be seen and reported. With that said, we do know that gear set in California is part of the problem. About 50% of these confirmed entanglements are in what NOAA Fisheries calls unknown fishing gear, where they aren't able to identify that specific fishery. But when they do know what gear was involved, about 20% of them are in California commercial Dungeness crab gear. And there have also been entanglements with spiny lobster, spot prawn, recreational crab, and commercial rock crab gear from California. So this next slide is a busy figure, but I want to use this infographic to walk through part of why we saw this big increase in entanglements in 2014. As Karen mentioned earlier, some of the large whales that we see off California are present seasonally. They aren't here year round. And if we're talking specifically about humpback whales and blue whales, they're arriving in waters off California during the spring and early summer to forage on things like krill and anchovy, and then they leave in the late fall to return to their winter breeding grounds. The timing of when the Dungeness crab fishery is open, which is the largest trap fishery in California, is essentially the opposite. The fishery is opening in November and December. There's a lot of fishing activity during the winter when the whales aren't here, and then the fishery tapers off in the spring. That means that in a typical year, the overlap between whales and Dungeness crab gear is fairly limited, other than for gear that was lost during the season. Well, all of that changed in around 2015. So as some of you may recall, there was a large marine heat wave event, and this massive change in the oceanography off of our coast had several impacts that increased the overlap between whales and crab gear. The first was changing ocean conditions. So the large marine heat wave led to a persistent harmful algal bloom, which created high levels of domoic acid in Dungeness crab tissues. And that caused the department and the California Department of Public Health to delay the opening of the Dungeness crab season until late spring. Some of these areas, which typically open in, as I said, November and December, didn't open until May of the following year. And that meant that instead of the gear going into the water in the fall, a lot of fishing happening during the winter, and a fairly marginal amount of gear still being there during the spring and early summer, all of the gear was going into the water in the spring, and so it was staying out there longer than usual. The other piece is that this large marine heat wave compressed the available cool water habitat, where things like anchovy and krill are typically found, to a narrow band along the coast, which meant that as the humpback whales showed up, they were concentrated in those same nearshore areas where their prey and the Dungeness crab gear was. So the high number of entanglements that we saw during the large marine heat wave has led to a lot of changes in the way we manage our crab fisheries, which I'll be talking more about later. But first, I am going to hand it back to Emily.
Great, thank you so much, Morgan. And next we're going to move into hearing from Peggy a little bit more about the entanglement network and what actually happens when a whale is discovered to be entangled. Peggy, you're muted.
That was great, Morgan. I really appreciate that. I remember 2015 coming out of Moss Landing on January 1st, and I could not believe how many humpback whale blows there were because we had so much feed here. They weren't, a lot of them stayed. If they weren't gonna mate or have young, there was no reason. I'd stay here too and feed on all that wonderful fish that was all over. So that was really an eye-opener that year. And that's when we ended up getting a larger vessel because the smaller one just wasn't working well. Anyway, whale disentanglement is just conducted under a special permit from NOAA Fisheries. And it's through the Marine Mammal Health and Stranding Response Program. And that gives authorization for responders to approach a whale to attempt a disentanglement. Because they are a protected species, you do need that authorization. And disentangling whales is dangerous. So our responders go through extensive training and many years of apprenticeship to learn proper techniques and protocols to ensure the safety of the rescuers and the safety of the animals. Trainings are conducted every year by NOAA, except for this year we had to put it off because of COVID, but we have lots of trainings with NOAA, but also it includes cross-training with other teams along the coastline, which is awesome, so that, you know, we can learn, we have a standardized method of how we approach and disentangle a whale. And by working with the other teams, you know, if you don't have enough people in your area, you might be able to just have someone come down or up from another area, which is great. We also have in-house trainings, the different teams with level 3 and level 4 responders, which I'll talk a little bit more about the levels later. Next slide. It's interesting because when Marine Life Studies first started in 2006, there really weren't any trained entanglement response teams north of Orange County. Our goal was, we thought, to have trained teams in Central and Northern California, and it's so exciting to see teams, you know, from Crescent City down to San Diego, Oregon, and Washington. It's really wonderful to see, and the people in the network care about the animals and are great working together and understanding the complexity and the dangers of disentangling a whale. So you have, oh, next slide, sorry. Oh, wait, no, back up one. Just about the entanglement. Yeah, thanks. I mean, we have so many different types of people in the network, including a lot of whale researchers, different whale watching and fishing businesses in Monterey Bay. They're usually the first ones that see an entangled whale. We oftentimes see them when we're doing research out on Monterey Bay, and we found entangled whales as too. But you have a lot of governmental institutions, NGOs, universities and educational institutions. You know, we have 4 sanctuaries in our state. So all those are part of our network, which really makes it very exciting. And disentangling whales can be very dangerous. So even for highly trained responders, it can be stressful on the whale. And everything during a response has to be approved or authorized by NOAA under that special permit that we work under. Next slide. It's great to have a response network with so many skilled responders, and that reduces the temptation for like untrained members from the public to attempt a disentanglement, because it is very dangerous. And for someone that doesn't have the skills, there's a lot of dangers and a lot of things you don't understand. That's why we really have worked hard, the whole country across the United States, to setting up these different levels. So you have your level 1 and level 2 first responders, and they're responsible for, you know, pretty much what it says on the slide, assessing and documenting and that kind of thing. And having them stand by. So that is very important. And if you think about it, there's, you know, you have a 40-foot or larger animal, 40-ton animal. You're out in the open ocean where conditions can change quickly. There's lines under load. I mean, there's just way too much that could go wrong for someone who really doesn't understand what's going on, doesn't have an experience or training. And that's true of any type of rescue effort, not just for whale rescue. Agencies that train for firefighters, policemen, etc. It's no different than whale rescue. There are just too much that can go wrong, and you have to be prepared. And that is the reason for the various responder levels that you see. And level 1s are pretty much anyone can be a level 1. Private boaters, whale watching fishing companies that see an entangled whale, they can call the hotline that's on the Marine Mammal Guide, SOS, 877 SOS whale. Or you can call into the US Coast Guard, either way. And it's so important, and people don't realize this, that it's better if you can stay and call immediately, because we've had people, you know, call the next day and let us know. If you can call right away, that animal has a better chance of being disentangled by a response team, because you got to think of a moving animal in a moving haystack. And so we go out and search, and sometimes we find them and sometimes we don't. So then you have your level 2, which has a little more training. They participated in different trainings in-house and even with NOAA trainings as well. So they can learn more about behavior and that sort of thing. During our research, a lot of people come and they can learn about whale behavior. That's a big key, is understanding the behavior of whales. I mean, just little nuances, whether they're swishing their tail, they might be a little agitated, they're changing their breath. So those are important things that responders, you know, have to have in their toolkit as well. And then you have level 3, the primary first responders, and I'm a level 3 under that special permit. You have to apply to NOAA to be a level 3, level 4, or a level 5. So we're qualified to attach a telemetry buoy and all the other things before that, but also assist a level 4 or 5 in disentangling a whale. And on a few cases, because we didn't have our level 4 in Monterey Bay, there's been a few disentanglements here that were overseen by level 4s, but they weren't actually on scene, because normally they do have to be on scene. Next slide.
Okay. And with that, great background on the network. We're going to watch a short video that was created by Marine Life Studies before diving into the what the response actually looks like. Okay, Peggy, take it away again.
Yeah, thanks. And you notice the permit number on the end of that video, because the numbers change over the years. So all the photos and videos have to be tagged with that permit number. So let's talk about the anatomy of a whale disentanglement. So first you have, get the report, you know, a whale watcher, a private citizen, even someone from shore has called in reports of entanglements. So that Marine Mammal Guide gives you a lot of information that the hotline, when they answer, will ask you, as well as, or if you've called the U.S. Coast Guard. Once the report is filed, a response team is mobilized to respond. And the first priority, once we arrive on the scene, is to assess the nature of the entanglement, because entanglements are very complex and everyone is unique and different. And as you can see, like if on the third photo, you can see a picture of a whale. Now the big picture is an illustration of the entanglement, and the picture within the picture is the actual entangled whale. And this was from the East Coast, but it's a great slide for people to understand. Now look, if you just see the top part of the whale in the dark gray in the illustration, it looks like just that one line is over top of the back. So you think, oh, that's being an easy disentanglement. We can cut that line and that whale would be free. But that isn't the case. You can see the complexity of all the different lines that are wrapped and twisted around the buoys, and it goes trailing line that goes beyond the whale that you can't see in the picture, wrapped around the fluke. So you have to be very careful in your initial assessment, because you want to cut the correct lines so that you release all of the entanglement, not just part of it where it swims away and then later, you know, has detrimental effects because not all the gear was released. Sorry, I lost my train. Oh no, I'm not ready, sorry.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I lost my train of thought for a second. We do have a lot of different tools for assessing the complexity of the entanglement. And so these pictures serve as a good reminder, especially that one to the private citizens, not to approach entangled whales, to be sure to stay at least 100 or more yards away, because your vessel could get snagged on a line underwater from the entanglement. In fact, we had one a few years back where we had been following this whale for quite a while, and it was, you know, July 3rd, traffic was horrible, so we were waiting for some other network members to join us. Well, while we were with it, the whale had just dove down, a boat went between us and the whale, and I was just holding my breath, but I thought, phew, they got by, that's fine. The whale surfaced, that boat turned immediately, came between us and the whale, not knowing there was line trailing behind that whale, and they got their props stuck on that line. Now the whale has all this extra tension on the line, it starts moving, they are being pulled backwards in what we call the Nantucket sleigh ride. Once you're getting pulled by a whale, they are screaming at us to save them. We aren't, so I called the Coast Guard immediately, because you could see the Coast Guard here, we were that close. But one time when the whale came up and then there was a little slack, they were able to get it off, and they zoomed off, which is good. So I doubt they'll ever go too close to a whale again. But that's the problem with having people approach an entangled whale too closely, that they can be part of the entanglement too. So that's really important for people, the general public, to understand. And our boat is really the rapid response boat for entanglements here in the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, but we have members in the sanctuary office here and other sanctuaries, and from Moss Landing Marine Lab, Long Marine Lab, and Hopkins. So there's a lot of different people in our area that are trained that can help with the response. Okay, next slide now. So one of the first things that once the assessment is complete, and if the team decides to attach a telemetry buoy, so which the telemetry buoy is only attached to any trailing line that's coming from the entanglement itself. We never attach a telemetry buoy to the whale itself. So the picture where you see the big orange balls and then sort of a lime green just barely showing, and you can see a little column coming up with a little antenna. That is actually the telemetry buoy, and it has an instrument in there that can go to depth, so it won't compress. But when it's at the surface, it sends a signal to the satellite for the Argos, and that will give you latitude and longitude so you can follow the whale, especially when, you know, it's late in the day, you're not able to finish or complete the disentanglement. You need the next day or another day to finish it, or the weather has come in. So that's what we do first. So, and then later we'll maybe add some polyballs to slow the whale down. Because most of the whales we get here, very rarely are they grounded, which means that they are secured to the seafloor with the line or pot gear. Most of the ones we get here are pretty mobile. And it's very rare to disentangle a whale in one day. We've done so on a few occasions, but it usually takes 2, 3, or 4 days. And the longest is one that lasted 17 days from start to finish, traveling over 600 nautical miles. And the picture in the center is actually, the whole team went down to Santa Barbara because the whale had traveled from Monterey Bay all the way down to the Channel Islands. And so the sanctuary down there assisted us with getting out to the whale and deploying the smaller boats to disentangle it. So there's a lot to it, but the main thing is looking at all the assessment pictures before you start cutting, because you want to be very judicious in what line you cut, because you don't want to leave any gear on the line if you can help it. So you don't want to just cut a line over here, which maybe is the line that was trailing from the whale you were using as a working line. So there's just a lot of factors that you have to consider to make your first cut. And there's a lot of thought and discussions by the level 4s in the network. When we're out there, it's not like we're out there alone. We are in constant contact with so many members in the network, not only in the state of California, Washington, Hawaii, and the East Coast. So there's a lot of thought that goes into disentangling a whale. So you're just not alone out there, but we've been under trainings with most of those people many times. So, and unfortunately we can't save them all, but every response we get a lot of information that where we can learn about what type of industry was that entanglement from? Is it something we can trace back? Is it just, you know, marine debris that's floating around? And all that helps to mitigate future entanglements. And there's so many people working on that issue, but we've had many successful disentanglements over the years. So that's very exciting. Now this next video that Emily is going to play is the one that took 17 days from start to finish. This was back in 2014. And so we started it here, as I said, and finished in the Channel Islands.
All right. So we'll actually get to see in this next video what it looks like when you do make a cut on a line.
And one thing I'd like to say, Emily, that whale there, we saw about 40 some days or 50 days later on July 3rd, because a lot of people didn't think that whale was going to make it. And I was out with a CSUMB student who is now our operations manager, a high school student from Colorado, and a college student from Ireland. When we saw this whale, and the injury looked so much like the whale that we had finished disentangling down off the Channel Islands. So it was so exciting. Everyone in the network was thrilled because we don't often get to see an animal after it's disentangled because we don't have any way to track it. We're not allowed to put a tag on them to see where they go. So this was a real exciting thing for everyone.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see the level of precision that you have to use on such a large animal in that tiny boat. And while you're all moving too, just the mechanics of that are really amazing, that you're able to do that and make a cut in just that one particular spot. It's really incredible work. So thank you so much for everything that you and your team are able to do.
Well, it takes a whole community. I mean, not just the people on the team, you know, from the donors to the sponsors, all that. I mean, it is a real community effort throughout the entire network. So we're very fortunate that way. So thanks.
Excellent. So now that we've gotten to know a little bit about the response process, we can jump into talking about mitigation. In response to this issue, there are a variety of agencies, organizations, and individuals, many of them on this event right now, working tirelessly across the state of California to prevent whale entanglements. Stakeholders are coming together and identifying ways to support healthy wildlife populations while also continuing to support the people in our community. Next, we'll hear some of the things being done to reduce the frequency of these incidents. Okay, and Morgan, with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Emily. So, as I mentioned earlier, this big increase in entanglements that we saw in 2014 and especially in 2015 drew a lot of attention to this issue. In August of 2015, CDFW worked with NOAA Fisheries, which is the federal agency responsible for protecting marine mammals, and the California Ocean Protection Council, which is a state agency charged with coordinating our state ocean policy and management activities, to convene a whale entanglement workshop in Oakland, where fishermen, conservation organizations, scientists, and a whole lot of other folks who are invested in this issue got together to share information and brainstorm on solutions. The following month, those same three agencies convened the first meeting of the California Dungeness Crab Fishing Gear Working Group. And this working group has been a really key and essential partner to CDFW in developing strategies and approaches to reducing entanglements while also ensuring healthy fisheries. They've played a really big role in a lot of the work that I'm going to talk about, and Karen Grimmer is one of several scientific advisors to that group. In 2018, recognizing the scope of this problem, CDFW received funding from the legislature for dedicated staff, including myself, to work on marine life entanglement issues. And our current focus with the Whale Safe Fisheries team is really dating back to those initial conversations in 2015 and thinking about the Dungeness crab fishery and how to reduce entanglements in that specific fishery. And that's due to the sheer amount of gear that fishery deploys each year. As I mentioned, it's one of the largest fisheries in the state of California, and the number of known entanglements that have resulted from gear from this fishery. However, as I noted earlier as well, we know that there are other state-managed fisheries which interact with large whales and cause entanglements. And our intention is to leverage the lessons that we're learning from our work with the Dungeness crab fishery and apply them to these other fisheries in the future. As I mentioned earlier, some of the whales off California are endangered and are protected under the Federal Endangered Species Act. So we at CDFW are currently preparing an application for an incidental take permit, which would allow the commercial crab fishery to interact with a certain number of humpback whales, blue whales, and Pacific leatherback sea turtles each season. And this application, or more specifically, the conservation plan that we're crafting to support our application, would also formalize the many efforts taken by the department and industry over the last few years to minimize the risk of marine life entanglement. And I'm going to talk about several of those efforts now. So one important part of our work is doing outreach to fishermen about what they can do to reduce the risk of entanglements. So the image on the left is the front page of the best practices guide that we produced last year. This is something that the working group puts together in advance of each Dungeness crab season and is broadly distributed to crab fishery participants, as well as other venues where fishermen tend to congregate, like gear and tackle shops. While it's designed with the Dungeness crab fishery in mind, a lot of these best practices will apply to other commercial and recreational trap fisheries. So it's certainly not only for Dungeness crab fishery participants. The image on the right is a new product that we put together for the first time last year. which is a pre-season newsletter that we send out to every commercial Dungeness crab fisherman. And it contains updates about the fishery and what are the current efforts the department is undertaking to reduce marine life entanglement risk, and any other reminders for the upcoming season to make sure that everyone has access to the information they need before the season starts. And these images are both from last year. We just finished updating the best practices guide, and we're currently finalizing our pre-season newsletter for the upcoming season. So those will be available online in the coming days, 2 weeks. On our next slide, so CDFW is a regulatory agency, so it's probably not a surprise that a lot of what we've put in place to address whale entanglements are either new or updated regulations on fishing activity. And these images highlight some of the recent rulemakings we've been working on to address this issue. So starting on the top left, as I mentioned earlier when talking about how entanglements in trap gear happen, a whale can become entangled either in the vertical line or in the gear that's at the surface. And so a few years ago, we established new depth-dependent restrictions on how much of that surface gear, the lines and the buoys, can be present, with the goal of making entanglements in the surface portion of the gear less likely. Moving across the screen, last year we completed a rulemaking to implement new marking requirements for our state-managed trap fisheries. And these new requirements will make it easier to tell both which fishery the gear is from, based on the unique letter, the P on this example buoy is for the lobster fishery, and who set the gear based on the unique numeric identifier for the fisherman or the vessel. And this sample buoy just has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which I do not think is anyone's actual unique identifier. When a whale is entangled, often one of the things that we can get a good photograph of is the buoys. And so these new markings will make it easier for us to tell which fishery the gear is from, and then follow up with the fishermen to better understand the circumstances that led to that entanglement. On the right side of the screen is a stack of recreational crab traps. While a lot of what I've been talking about is about the commercial fishery, the Fish and Game Commission has oversight over the recreational crab fishery, and they are currently considering a rulemaking that would implement several new requirements for this fishery, including unique gear marking, trap limits, a validation stamp so we know how many people are participating, and allowing for in-season changes to fishery operations if there's elevated marine life entanglement risk. This has been an ongoing process over the last several months, and the Commission is currently scheduled to take final action on this package at their meeting in December. Moving to the bottom row, on the left-hand side, this is a stack of lost or abandoned commercial Dungeness crab traps that were retrieved this summer under a new CDFW program. And Peggy and I will both be talking more about removal of lost or abandoned gear a little later on in the presentation. And lastly, a few years ago, the working group started looking at ways to better monitor the Dungeness crab fisheries so that we would have a better understanding of where the gear is. That led to a pilot project where solar loggers, which is what's shown in this photo here, were put on both commercial Dungeness crab vessels, so we know where they're fishing, and on some whale watching vessels so we can get a sense of where the whales are. Starting this season, we have new requirements for some vessels to carry these types of electronic monitoring devices, and we'll have 100% monitoring required starting with the 2023-24 fishing season. The last rulemaking that I want to talk about today is perhaps the most important, and that's the risk assessment and mitigation program. So this was originally piloted by the working group, and Emily, if you could switch to the next slide, that would be.
Sorry.
So this was originally piloted by the working group as a way to collect and bring together information about ocean conditions, forage, marine life concentration, fishing dynamics, and trends and entanglements, put all that information together to assess risk and then recommend changes to fishery operations to reduce that risk. Initially, the outcomes of this process were limited to encouraging the fleet to voluntarily change their practices when risk was elevated. But in 2019, we were given new authority by the legislature to actually require those changes. And we used that authority we used that authority during the 2019-20 fishing season, so this past fishing season. We conducted 13 risk assessments with the working group and both delayed the opener and closed the season early for what's called the Central Management Area, which is the area south of the Sonoma-Mendocino County line. Based on the pilot by the working group and after many, many hours of scoping conversations with our interested stakeholders, we launched a formal rulemaking process in May of this year to codify the ramp into regulation. Those regulations were recently approved by our Office of Administrative Law and will be in place before the start of this next fishing season. This new ramp creates 7 fishing zones, which you can see in the map on the right, and establishes specific thresholds which will indicate when risk is elevated in each fishing zone. And we will then consult with the working group on the appropriate management action, which could include a fleet advisory, a depth constraint, reduction in the amount of gear that can be deployed, a delay or closure of a fishing zone, or use of alternative gear. And that alternative gear would be gear which CDFW has determined poses a reduced risk of entanglement, and it would allow fishermen to continue harvesting crab for all of us to enjoy, while also minimizing the risk that a whale would be entangled in that gear. And with that, I will turn it over to Karen to talk more about this work on gear innovation.
Okay, thanks, Morgan. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So as Morgan discussed, the Dungeness Crab Fishing Gear Working Group has been working on a variety of ways to mitigate or reduce risk from whales being entangled in fishing gear. And they formed a subcommittee a few years ago now to evaluate the different types of gear innovations. So before we start, there's a few terms to define here. Pop-up or acoustic buoy releases are new developing technologies that either partially or fully eliminate the vertical rope or line between the fixed gear pot or trap that's on the bottom of the seafloor and a surface buoy. So with this type of technology, all the gear remains submerged with the trap on the bottom, with the float potential down but with the trap, until fishermen employ an acoustic trigger which releases the buoy back up to the surface for retrieval. So this method really eliminates the need for vertical lines in the water column until it's necessary for the fishermen to pull their trap. And it really reduces the time available for whales to interact with the gear. So that's one of the types being looked at. And then there's lots of other types of alternative gear, including the use of compressed air and inflatable bags, or timed triggers such as corrosive metals. And so with the corrosive metals, essentially there's a connector that maybe would erode after 2 days, and after 2 days then the buoy would be released, and the fishermen would know that and be able to come and retrieve the gear at that time. So, you know, there's a lot of experimentation going on, and the manufacturers of these different types of gear are working really hard to take input from fishermen and try to adapt some of their ideas so that, you know, they work well on a busy fishing vessel. And there's some challenges to work through, things like gear conflicts. So for example, having gear put on gear is an issue because you wouldn't be able to see the buoy. So you really have to have a system that identifies where the gear is. There's also the cost of the gear. There's the performance of the acoustic releases. So making sure that those work. And so all of these modifications and testing continue, and they take some time. And then we have something called low-tech options, which are also a defined method of gear modification. And some fishermen are already testing modifications to their existing gear, such as using weak links, which are designed to break free at a set pressure threshold. So the weak links are already widely employed. However, you know, their effectiveness is still being tested. And so that's another reason further testing is needed for that type of technology. And then building on some of the work by the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, gear testing in Monterey Bay and Bodega Bay began during the 2017 and 18 season. And last September in 2019, we held a Gear Innovation Testing Day, and that's where this photo was taken. So that was led by CDFW and supported by the Sanctuary and the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. The group of fishermen and gear manufacturers tested a variety of alternative gear in the bay, including 6 different gear systems. So we collected data on how the gear performed, with fishermen deploying and retrieving the gear from the CDFW patrol vessel. And we learned a lot that day. We really did. And we were able to start ranking and prioritizing the gear that had operated as designed. And reporting back to the working group, they decided to move forward to the next level of development and field trials. And then most recently, the Ocean Protection Council funded the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation to implement a more formal gear innovation program to continue exploring and expanding the testing with fishermen and that will be occurring in different regions of California. And then as Morgan mentioned, CDFW has that option in the new regulations for gear innovation use in areas that might be closed potentially to high entanglement risk to traditional trap fishing. So, you know, they have specific criteria that must be met for approved use. So, you know, the group has been working really hard with manufacturers, with funders to just try and see what works. And it's going to take some more work, and we're going to continue to go forward doing that, hopefully even this fall and into next year. And so we'll try some more field trials and, you know, find out which types of gear have been able to adapt based on all of this extensive input. So that'll be fun. Passing back to Morgan.
Thanks, Karen. So as I mentioned earlier, generally the Dungeness crab fishery is operating when the whale species that we're most concerned about, humpbacks and blue whales, aren't present off of California. And most of the gear is out of the water when the whales do start arriving during the spring and early summer. However, due to storms, currents, or other issues, some gear is lost or abandoned each season and will still be out there in the water when the whales show up. And that's really a lose-lose situation because the gear isn't catching the crab, but it's still posing this risk of whale entanglement. In 2013, we created a mechanism for commercial Dungeness crab vessels to remove lost or abandoned gear that they found either during or outside of the fishing season. But over the last few years, we had heard from industry that they wanted a more formal and focused program to target removing this gear. So last year, we established a new program to do just that, and we implemented it for the first time in 2020. We issued 7 permits to qualified entities in Crescent City, Trinidad, Eureka, Bodega Bay, San Francisco, Half Moon Bay, and Monterey Bay, which was pretty good spatial coverage of all of the major ports where commercial Dungeness crab fishing happens. Those permittees then worked with what we call designated retrievers, who are essentially commercial trap fishermen, to remove lost or abandoned Dungeness crab gear after the close of the season. Those permittees are guaranteed compensation for their work to remove this gear, either from the Dungeness crab fishermen in exchange for getting their gear back, or from CDFW. And this photo is from a visit I did to our permittee in San Francisco earlier this year. I'll be receiving logbooks documenting all of this work in the next week or so, and there will be summaries available on our Whale Safe Fisheries webpage early next year. And now I will hand it back to Peggy to talk about some of Marine Life Studies' work on this same issue.
Thanks, Morgan and Karen. It just shows everyone how many different entities and different aspects of whale disentanglement. It's not just one dimensional. There's so many people working for the same purpose, which is so exciting to me, and I'm sure to many of you out there as well. We decided that, you know, we know disentangling whales is important, but it's really a Band-Aid on the problem, and that, but it's an important endeavor. But we really wanted to do something more proactive, and I had heard about people removing abandoned or lost gear with no surface buoy at all on the surface. So what gear we're looking for could have been down there for a year or two that got lost by, as Morgan said, or Karen, the storms or that kind of thing, or current. So we started this project last year to remove that. So what we did is we contracted with an entity that has a side sonar scanner. So we towed that behind our boat, looking, and that'll give you imagery of the sea floor. And I mean, it's not easy to see the targets. So that's what we call them, which are, you know, a pot or some kind of fishing gear in on the sea floor, but also you can see lines too through the water column. So that could potentially, you know, entangle not only a whale, but sharks, dolphins, turtles, large fish, and other marine mammals. So we did that where we scanned it. And then what we did is we contracted local crab fishermen because CDFW told us, and I was working with Morgan, and I have a permit that I worked with Karen and Sophie through the sanctuary in order to do this work. But what we wanted to do is then use the commercial crab fishermen, because they know how to pull that gear. They already have the equipment, and they were excited to be part of the program. So as you can see in this slide, that the gear this is what we first pulled out last fall. We got a total of 1,000 pounds of derelict gear, including 17 pot traps, 3,000 feet of line, and 3 anchor, what they call mud anchors. But when we looked at everything, and we gave all this data not only to Morgan, but also to Karen at the sanctuary, her and Sophie, that what was interesting is that just in that small amount, 70% of those traps were from recreational gear, not commercial crab fishing. So, which I thought it would actually be the other way around, but I was really amazed that it wasn't. So we've continued that project this year. We just got done doing the scanning, and now we're going to start pulling the gear, and we're working with couple of the local fishermen, Calder Dyerly and Giovanni Aveloso. So it's very exciting to be able to remove that gear. And then we do, if it's marked, then we return it to the fishermen, which is only the commercial gear, because recreational gear, as of regulations are probably changing now, but at the time they didn't have to mark their gear at all.
Excellent. I'm just going to turn my video back on. Well, it's really amazing to hear how each of your organizations are working collaboratively and individually to tackle this problem from all angles, from understanding how, when, and where this problem occurs, to creating new legislation and regulations, to forming these really creative and innovative solutions in terms of gear, and then even removing gear that is in fact lost. It seems a very well-rounded approach that you all work on together, and it's great to see so many different agencies, NGOs, federal and state, all working together to solve this problem. But of course, in addition to wonderful agencies like all of yours, we all play a vital role in protecting our local wildlife. So to conclude the speaker portion of our event tonight, we're next going to discuss actions that we can all take to help protect whales and other critical species of the Monterey Bay and beyond. And with that, I will hand it back over once again to Morgan, or Karen, sorry.
Thanks, Emily. And you are absolutely right. Everybody plays such a vital role, and we really rely on our volunteers and the public kind of being observant and noticing that something is different and giving us a call. And, you know, basically the public is our eyes and ears, and we really appreciate that. So here's some numbers to call, which I think were mentioned earlier, but just make sure you have them, and I'm sure you're going to be able to get a copy of the PowerPoint so you can get them later too.
Yes,
But
and we're also
West
dropping all of these links into the chat as well.
Oh, fabulous. Great idea. So the West Coast Entanglement Hotline, if any kind of whale that you think has a line on it or looks suspicious, if you're on a boat or from shore, give them a call, and they'll ask you for some, you know, information about the location and photos if you have them, and you can, you know, definitely talk to a person to pass on that information. And then if you're on the boat, I think Peggy mentioned hailing the Coast Guard. They use channel 16, and they will respond as well. And then for other marine mammals like seals and sea lions and otters and dolphins, the Marine Mammal Center is the place to call. And there's the Sausalito number with the 415, or we have a great local office here in Moss Landing, and that's the 831 number. So they are also part of the response team for the whale entanglement as well, and play a big role in assisting on that. If you're lucky enough to see a leatherback sea turtle or other turtles, which the leatherbacks are very, very rare, so we really think that's important to track. If people see them out on the water, you can send an email to Southwest Fisheries Science Center, and of course they'd love if you have a photo of that. And then I think Peggy covered the NOAA Fisheries Level 1 disentanglement training with a focus on reporting, and just another plug that it's a really interesting and cool group to work with, and they are always looking for new recruits, and you learn a lot just from level 1 and 2. So just wanted to plug that again.
Thank you. And Morgan, I think you have a few more items to share with us.
Yes, so now for what can we do for more of the fishing side of things. One thing that everyone here tonight can do is support best fishing practices. So if you or someone you know is a commercial or recreational trap fisherman, you can implement those best fishing practices that I mentioned earlier. And if you're not, but you buy seafood, you can choose to purchase crab and other seafood from fishermen who are implementing those best practices. Another thing that anyone can do is participate in our trap gear retrieval program. So while applying for those permits and actually going out and retrieving the gear is limited to certain groups and individuals, anyone who is out on the water can report seeing lost or abandoned gear. If you know there's a permittee in your area, you can share that information with them directly. And if not, you can send it to us and we can share it out to the appropriate individuals. If you are a commercial dangerous crab fisherman or a whale watch operator, you can participate in that solar logger pilot project that I mentioned earlier. And lastly, if you want to stay engaged and learn more about all of the work that we're doing at CDFW, you can sign up for updates from us. We have a form on our webpage where you can sign up for our Whale Safe Fisheries email listserv, which we are going to start using a lot during this season and in years to come to communicate updates and opportunities for people to get involved in our work.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, with that, we've concluded the speaker portion of the event this evening, and we would love to take questions from the audience. So if you'd like to type your questions into the chat, you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question verbally, that's fine as well. And we'll direct your questions to our speakers. And Gail, I wasn't monitoring the chat throughout. Did we have any questions come through as folks were speaking?
We did not. I think people were paying really close attention. They didn't have time to think of questions.
Mhm.
All right.
And it was a very thorough presentation.
Excellent. Any questions for our speakers? You can unmute yourself or type into the chat. If you want to pop on video so we can see you, that's fine too.
Well, I just wanted to say it was a joy working with Morgan and Karen over the years. Morgan just the last few years, but I've known Karen for a very long time and worked with her. And thank you, Emily, for putting this together. You can go to all the different things that were listed on this to learn more information. That level 1, like you said, was it's really a good program to get involved in if you want to do anything with disentanglement. Just start, with that, because you can do a lot as a private citizen and helping us. So it's very important, and we really appreciate the camaraderie between all the different team members across the state. It's very exciting.
Yeah, it's true. And I think just having awareness about the issue, even just first and foremost, is really important, because once you're aware, then you're kind of on the lookout and you can dive into some of those other opportunities or report sightings, etc. Well, we do have some questions here. So from Whitley Mike, we have a question. Are there any innovations in sustainable design that could be useful in reducing entanglements? So maybe Karen, if you'd like to take this question about kind of the gear innovation, any innovations in sustainable design that could be useful in reducing entanglements?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So sustainable design, so meaning that it's something, that is environmentally sensitive potentially and can be reused many times. I'm assuming that's kind of the idea. And yeah, I think some of the gear that was tested would be in that category. Definitely it's being designed to be small and compact and have a footprint that can fit on a fishing boat with a lot of crab pots. So as you can imagine, size matters, because those little boats sometimes are packed with gear, and there's not a lot of room for additional gear. So I think the manufacturers are looking at making small, compact units that can be attached to existing traps. And there's various designs for that, but I think that the ones that seem to be most promising have the ability to pop up either through air or through an acoustic release. And I think there's still, like I said, a ways to go on some of the design flaws that we saw, but we're getting there. And hopefully by next year, potentially, there could be some, production going on, and there could be some fishermen that are utilizing that type of gear, which is the goal. Sorry, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but feel free to chime in, Morgan.
No, I think you did a great job, Karen. Nothing to add here.
Great. So then we have another question here from GMS. Not sure who that is, but thank you for your question. Are there affiliated organizations in Oregon, Washington, or British Columbia? So do any of you know of kind of the equivalent of your organization in any of those locations, Oregon, Washington, or British Columbia?
Well, I know in Washington State, there's SR3, and Doug Sandylands is a level 4 who travels from there down to here, and he's here currently. He's a level 4. There's John Kalmakitas with Cascadia Research out of Olympia, Washington. He's a level 4 as well. We've been sending our data that we get on whales in this area to John. I've been sending up there for about 22 years. In Oregon, you have, there's members of Bruce Mate's team. Bruce Mate is a professor there, and he's an incredible guy who's really dedicated to learning about whales and had done a lot of the tagging. Like that's how they figured out how the migration rate route was from Alaska to Hawaii, because I used to work for a research team in Hawaii too, volunteering. And then, you know, we have many in this state. But yeah, it's coast-wide. I don't know in British Columbia, but I know that they did some training up there. I just don't know the name of the organization.
Yeah, and then certainly, you know, there are counterparts for us as well. So the California Department of Fish and Wildlife is the state agency that manages fish and wildlife resources for California. There are departments of fish and wildlife in Oregon and Washington as well. And as I mentioned, you know, this really is a West Coast wide problem. We focus tonight on California because that's where all of us are, but the Oregon and Washington Departments of Fish and Wildlife are also working on developing conservation plans, also applying for incidental take permits under the Federal Endangered Species Act. And the 3 states have a long history of coordinating really closely on management of the Dungeness crab fisheries, since they are such hugely important fisheries for all 3 of the states. There's an annual process for determining when the seasons are going to open, what domoic acid testing protocols look like, how full the crab should be, or what kind of crab quality we should have before we open the fishery, how much time to allow after the spring molt. So there was a very well established history of coordination among the states before this whale entanglement issue came about, and it has been added to that sort of ongoing tri-state coordination efforts. And additionally, our working group here in California was the first one, but we now also have similar working groups that are based in Oregon and Washington that are employing a similar cross-stakeholder collaborative model to better understanding and coming up with innovative solutions for dealing with this issue.
That's great to hear. Excellent. And Karen, I know your agency is federal. Did you want to share anything in relation to that question?
Sure. Yes, we have Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary up off of Port Angeles. And that sanctuary is also part of the discussions on disentanglement and reducing entanglement in that state. So my counterpart and I talk and exchange information. And recently, I just wanted to add, we had a fabulous science workshop, a set of workshops actually put on by NOAA Fisheries that pulled together all the entities on the West Coast, essentially, to talk about the science for entanglement and how to, really figure out modeling and be able to project out, looking at, the oceanographic climate conditions and other factors to determine, what's coming up. So I think there's a lot of communication on the West Coast, and we're also connecting with the East Coast. As you know, the right whale is on the East Coast, and they have some entanglement issues there. So nationally, there's a lot going on, and I think, we'll continue to have conversations and build upon knowledge. And that's the goal.
Great, thank you. This next question, I think, is for Peggy. Is it possible for people volunteering on the boats to disentangle?
Eventually, yes. Takes a lot of training. We are kind of unique because, as you said in the beginning, I didn't see a whale till I was 41 years old. So when I started marine life studies, my whole premise was to pay it forward and share. So you can come and volunteer for marine life studies as part of the research scientist program. Because we work under a federal permit to research whales and dolphins, you can come out with us. We'll teach you research techniques. You don't have to have any experience. We'll teach you. But by doing that, you're coming out with us. You're learning the different equipment on the boat, how to use the cameras, the GPS, how to take data, how to do the video, those kind of things. Plus you'll be observing whales, and we'll always be discussing like, what are they doing? What kind of behavior is that? So that's a first step. And from there we have in-house trainings where we'll teach you how to turn on the telemetry buoy, where all the equipment is. The equipment on our boat is all marked, so I can say, hey, go to the forward cabin, get me the flying knife. And so even if they, you know, are new, they can go and get that, and we'll teach them how to put the tools on. They're not going to be in the little boat at all in the beginning, but as they, you know, train, then they'll get those opportunities. They'll get those opportunities with us when we do our in-house training, because, you know, we have Currency, which is a 40-foot boat, and we have our small disentanglement boat, which is a wing, which is specially designed for that. So, you know, we'll practice towing. We have a wooden whale tail that we drag so that we can try to actually practice even cutting lines, but throwing the grapple and that kind of thing. So people rotate out and try those, because, you know, in previous, long before this network was set up so solidly, you know, you basically just went out and, you know, started working on a whale once you've had some training. But this, it's a lot more solidified since when we first started. Because when I first began, I was a level 3, but I didn't have to apply for anything. And then NOAA changed it, so you had to apply. So it took me a while to apply because I was always so busy. And then I applied and I got my level 3. So you can work your way up. We have quite a few level 4s on the West Coast. That's never been what I wanted to do. That's really for someone younger. I like to help be like the incident commander when there isn't a level 4 on our vessel. But you can work your way out. And one thing I should reiterate, because I get a lot of people that tell me this, they go, oh, I'm a diver. Well, one thing people need to realize, we never get in the water with the whales here, never. We do everything from small boats. Some of the techniques were developed actually from the old whaling days, like the polyballs. But they're like the kegs that they used to attach to whales, or like in Jaws, you know, they wanted to slow the shark down, so they attach those barrels. So our polyballs are like those barrels. So we did learn a lot, and some of the tools are even fashioned, you know, after some of the whaling days. So, but we don't need divers. It's nice that you dive, but you're going to stay in the boat.
Thank you. Thanks for making that clarification. I could see how people would be excited about that, but that'd be incredibly dangerous as well. All right, excellent. We have a question from Jen Fields. Given OPC, and I'm thinking Ocean Protection Council's Vision Zero mortality of whales and sea turtles goals, what are other priorities of your organizations besides entanglements for preventing whale and sea turtle mortality? Anybody feel like tackling that one?
I can take that one. So this is Karen. So another threat to large whales, as you guys might be familiar with, is whale strikes, or strikes from vessels. And that happens pretty, you know, periodically, I will say. And usually we find out from a whale that is washed up on the beach, and then there's a necropsy, and they look and find that there's broken bones or some kind of blunt trauma that killed the whale. And so this is something that the sanctuaries are working on, and primarily Greater Farallones, which is just north of Monterey, and Channel Islands have been requesting that the mariners slow down as they come into that area of high density of whales. And it's been pretty well received just on a voluntary basis to do this slow down. It's a seasonal slowdown. So when the whales are around, they're asked to slow down to 10 knots. And they've had quite a good, you know, compliance with that. And there's more probably that can be done. And I think we'll be looking at other options and talking with Coast Guard and other agencies about that. but it's definitely, there's a lot going on with looking at that issue and trying to reduce ship strikes to whales. So that's an example of something else, another way to really protect our whales under kind of the bigger umbrella of whale conservation.
Yeah, that was a great start, Karen. I think I'll say that, you know, as the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, what we have jurisdiction over and can really control and change are fishing activities. And so that's why our response to the marine life entanglement issue has been really focused on what are the changes we can make to how the fishery operates to reduce the risk that a whale will encounter a trap and that whale will then become entangled. So with that said, I think we're taking a pretty comprehensive approach to that. And I walked through, you know, a lot of those efforts earlier on this evening to tackle that issue from a lot of different angles. But that is really where our ability to impact and make a difference on this issue is grounded. Other than that, obviously, you know, we work closely with the California Ocean Protection Council and with our other state agencies and our federal agency partners, and are certainly happy and excited to help them advance some of the other related initiatives that they're moving forward.
Great. Thank you. I think this one is probably also for Karen from Mark Chaffee. What is expected to be a reasonable per trap cost for high-tech anti-entanglement gear?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've heard different numbers depending on the you know, type of trap or type of gear, and it's expensive. I mean, I've heard as much as $750 a unit. So the manufacturers feel that once they can get the smaller design down and they can look at larger production, that cost would go down. And I do know that there are funders that would look to assist with those initial costs, and potentially fishermen could get some help to get gear. So it's an issue, and with anything new, it's going to be that way until it becomes, you know, much more used and produced, and the cost per unit can go down.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to put that number in perspective for folks, it depends a little bit on the specific design, but I've often heard that a new trap, just a standard trap setup, is about $200. So when you start talking about that cost to have the trap and adding several $100s, that can start to feel very expensive for your average fisherman. And the high potential cost is definitely one of the things that we have heard a lot from fishermen as a concern about moving too fast on requiring the use of some of these new types of gear. But as Karen mentioned, there's still a lot of testing and a lot of work and refinement that needs to happen. And we're certainly hopeful that once a gear is really ready for use and adoption by the fishery, that there will be that sort of broad scale manufacturing that's going to drive that cost down. There's also the possibility that some of these new types of gear might actually have lower loss rates because of some of the, you know, electronics that are attached to them to help the fishermen find that again. They might lose less of their gear, so they might have to replace less of it each year. But there are still a lot of unanswered questions about how much exactly things will end up costing. And the idea about what's a reasonable cost, I think, really depends on your perspective.
Definitely. Great, thank you. I think we'll take one last question, and this is in regards to cruise ships. So a participant said, I heard that the sanctuary may become open to cruise ships docking in Monterey. Is this a possibility? Seems as though it would be in violation of the sanctuary rules. I'm sure many of us on this call are kind of familiar with this issue. Maybe Karen, do you want to take that one with the sanctuary?
Sure. So cruise ships have been coming into Monterey for a number of years. I think they really started after 9/11. So early 2000s, we were starting to get cruise ships coming in, and what happens is they come into not into the harbor, but close to the harbor, and they anchor out a ways, and then they have the small little vessels that shuttle people in and back to the cruise ship. So they have very large, I guess, deep drafts, and I don't see how it would be possible for cruise ships to dock in Monterey. I think they would continue to anchor outside of the port and shuttle people in. I have heard people be concerned about in Santa Cruz, potentially that happening. And I know that there is an effort to rebuild. There's a new dock being built in Santa Cruz, so maybe it's something to do with that linkage. But I haven't heard anything definitive on that. And I would expect that we'd still see kind of a standard or low level number coming back into Monterey once we get through COVID and the cruise ship industry starts back up again at some point, but not for a while. So
Great, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for your wonderful questions. We're just about to wrap up here, and I'm just going to share my screen one final time. And I'm going to ask our communications manager, Gail McNulty, to share some information about another event that we have coming up pretty soon. Gail, you want to share a little bit about Waves and Wildlife?
Yeah, thank you, Emily. So coming up next Friday, we have our annual Waves and Wildlife 2020 awards ceremony and celebration. And I am thrilled to say we had just amazing photos come in this year. And so thank you if anyone on this call actually did submit photos to us this year. Thank you so much.
They were beautiful.
Yeah, it's an amazing show of photos, and we are super grateful because doing this contest each year both raises awareness about the vitality of our protected sanctuary or marine protected areas. And also gives us all this beautiful material that we can then use in our Save Our Shores promotions throughout the year. So we are super grateful to everybody that entered, and we hope you will join us next Friday from 6 to 8 for our awards ceremony and celebration. And
maybe we can throw the link into the chat for people to register if they're interested.
I will throw that link into the chat, and I was all ready for the final slide with that link.
Great.
But I will write it but I will first run and grab our Waves and Wildlife link. Thanks, Emily.
Yes, thank you. All right, well, thank you so much to everyone who joined into the conversation tonight, and I hope you learned something new and enjoyed what you heard. And thank you so much to our wonderful speakers for sharing your expertise and your knowledge, and for all of the work that you do each and every day. It seems, you all work incredibly hard on these issues, and there were so many compliments in the chat from folks that tuned in about how much they enjoyed this and how much they got from it. So thank you so much for taking the time to prepare and present tonight. It was a really excellent evening, and we greatly appreciate it. We have the contact information for all three of the speakers right here on the slide, and those will be popping into the chat as well. So if anyone has any other questions, burning questions they didn't get to ask, feel free to contact anyone from this presentation. And with that, we have concluded our event. So thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, and thanks to Save Our Shores for putting this on. We really appreciate it. All.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Peggy, thanks for the idea.
Thank you.
You called me, Peggy, in February about this. And
oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, we've been working on it ever since. So.
Sorry.
No, it was such a great idea, and look what it turned into. And I'm glad that even COVID didn't stop us. So
I know. I am glad too.
Thank you.
All right. Talk to you guys soon. Take care, everybody.
bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.